Okay, thanks so much, first off, Melissa, for organizing this. So I'm going to just introduce everyone here on the call from Braze. So my name is Pooja Vishwanathan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Braze. And then with me is Namit Sharma, who's the business development manager at Braze. We also have Phil Ratzlaff today, who is one of our customers. Now, Phil has no financial interest in the company. He's really here just to speak about his experience as a customer. And so I'm going to be interviewing him and really kind of taking everyone on a journey along with Phil and his experience. And then we also have Manfred Call, who's also online, and he's our local representative there in Virginia. So as we move forward, if you have any questions, Manfred will be there to assist, to come in and do in-services and things like that. All right, so I'll give you a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll start chatting with Phil here. So just so everybody here gets a little bit of an intro about me, I started in this space over a decade ago. So I started off as a researcher. So my background was very much in technology, and I was doing a PhD in computer science and specifically looking at this area of smart wheelchairs. And so that's, how do we make wheelchairs safer for people to use so that they can be more independent and mobile. And that research for me spanned over a decade. And then I started working more closely with clinical researchers and clinicians and really tried to understand what the current problems are and realize that, there aren't a whole lot of solutions available today, mainly in terms of helping people be safer. We've seen a lot of technology developed in the automotive space, and so seeing sensors developed in cars and not really seeing that technology being offered for wheelchairs. And so 2016, so that was 4 years ago, I started Braze, and here we are. And in fact, a special shout out really to Richmond, because Richmond was one of our earliest adopters in trialing and evaluating our technology with clients there. So today we're going to do an interview with Phil. I'm going to show you a demo for many of you who might not be familiar with our technology, and for those who are, this is our latest product, so there'll probably still be some interesting updates for everyone. And then, time permitting, I'll also show you guys a snippet of some of our apps that we've just launched, which you might be interested in. Okay, so let's start off. So Phil, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself, tell everybody about your background, especially in the Marines, and how you got here?
Okay, thanks, Pooja. Hi all. My name's Phil. I live in northern Minnesota, and I was a Marine for 4 years at the height of NOM, but praise God, I didn't have to go. So I served 4 years here in the States, and I have a service-connected 100% disability. So my diagnosis is a ALS type disease like Lou Gehrig's, only it is slower moving than ALS. A few years ago, I had a TBI, which is a traumatic brain injury, and I lost my memory from when I was about 20 till just a few years ago. So I feel like I'm a 20-year-old Marine, and yet my body says I'm a 69-year-old man. But my heart is a young guy with a Marine mentality. I lost my vision a few years ago, actually a little over a year and a half ago, and became legally blind. And so that's been a real adjustment. But other than that, I'm in pretty good shape. I don't have any legs. I've got a tracheostomy. Maybe you can see that in my neck, and I'm on the vent in the afternoons and at night. So, other than that, like I say, I'm in good shape. So, um,
Yeah, Phil,
I do have
yeah, go ahead.
I do have a lot of memory loss, short-term memory loss. I used to program computers and worked with C plus, if any of you are familiar with computer technology. Now, today, I couldn't read a line of code. It doesn't make a bit of sense to me, but I know I used to be able to do that. So,
All right, if that's fantastic, Bill. So let's hear about your wheelchair experience. So I know you've been using wheelchairs, both manual and power, for a long time. So if you can speak a little bit about your experience with, first using a manual chair and then powered chair.
okay, I've got 40 years in the wheelchair. Even before I lost my legs, I was in a manual chair for 20 years and a power chair for 20 years. Um, Most people find that wheelchairs are confining and scary to transition to a wheelchair, like if you have MS or something like that. But for me, it was really freeing. Before I got my first chair, I'd sit in the car while my wife went into the mall or something. And then after I got my first chair, I could just go with her and I could go wherever I wanted to. When I got my first power chair, that was quite an adjustment. And I would, yeah, it was an adjustment. Running into walls, you all know if you're in a power chair how easy it is to tear up the house. So, yeah.
What would you say some of the other challenges were of transitioning into having a power chair? So if you could speak a little bit about, navigation within your home, how would you typically navigate, through of course, I've been in your home and I've seen that some of the type spaces there. Can you speak a little bit about some of the challenges navigating in your own home?
Yeah. Not only trying to get through a doorway, but, in the living room, I'd hook the couch with my chair, and you know how powerful they are. I'd drag the couch across the room and not even know I had it. And so punching holes in walls and cutting corners too tight and tearing off uh, the casing on the corners. So it was very difficult having to have a uh, a caretaker walk with me and tell me you're getting a little too far to the right, or you got to turn here, and sometimes they'd just take the joystick from me, and I have an attendant control in the back, so they could have a joystick in the back and would just steer for me, and it was really demeaning for me.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about a traumatic experience that you had a couple of years ago that really led you on your journey with Braze. So if you can tell everybody about that experience a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I was at the Minneapolis VA. I'm very familiar with that VA. I've been going there for several years, but I was going down this one hallway where there was a store, and I was being real careful because I knew I had lost a lot of sight. but I hadn't learned to use a cane yet, and I didn't have the brace system. And I ran into a child's uh, stroller, and I ran it over. I mean, it took them quite a while to disengage us, and it was really traumatic for me. I was so glad there wasn't a kid in that stroller. It would have just been terrible for the child and terrible for me. And that still is a traumatic experience to talk about because I was being careful. It was a bright red stroller, they told me, but I just couldn't see it and just ran over it. And it was really traumatic.
So what did you do after that incident, Phil?
I have a blind friend, blind from birth, Ken, and he and I were looking online for any kind of sonar type devices, glasses, or anything, and we came across this brace system. And so I talked to my PT people in Minneapolis, and they were willing to try out the system on my chair. And so they set it up. Actually, we set it up in several different ways before we finally set up with a front and a rear uh, sensors that then I could tell if I was getting close to something using the vibrator pads on my back if something was in front, or my left armrest vibrated if something was on the left, and same with the right. And so that was just a complete uh, change in my ability to drive.
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to take a little break with you, Phil, and I'm going to show everybody a quick product demo so that everybody's aware of what the system can do, and you know, and then we can get into more details around how you use the system, Phil. So thank you so much for that so far, and we'll get back to you here. Hopefully, everyone can see. I have a live demo set up here. In the meanwhile, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box, and Namith will moderate them for me so I can answer questions as we go. We'd love to make this as interactive as possible. So here, I'll start with right here. All right. So I'll just explain how the system works, or kind of how everything's set up here right now. And so on the bottom, we've got what we call the Sentina, which is 180 degrees of horizontal coverage and about 45 to 50 degrees of vertical coverage. Now this unit typically goes on the rear of a chair, but it can also go in the front. In fact, Phil has one in the back and one in the front. So that he's got coverage both in the front and the back. And then what we've got up here is what we call the controller. It does contain the visual and auditory feedback right there, and I'll show you how that works. What I have here is an echo head. This is a sensor that sees about 45 to 50 degree of a cone, and so it can be used for more targeted coverage. You know, typical areas where an echo head might go would be in the front, for example, to cover for peripheral vision. So if you've got someone with peripheral vision issues, or someone with stroke, for example, who might have neglect in a specific area, those sensors can be used to cover those areas as well. Now this whole...
The echo head is just out of the picture. We can't quite see it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's better.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Phil. So yeah, so these echo heads can also go on either the front and the sides, or sometimes they're also placed on the headrest in the back, so it can give people feedback on how far they can recline before they drill a hole into the wall. Okay, so let's get to the visual feedback right now. And so I've got the sensors that are currently seeing my laptop, and so you'll see some yellow lights light up here, but I'll try to show you the transition. So as I get close, within a foot of the sensors, you'll notice that red lights come across from left to right. It is very hard to capture this on screen. It's a lot easier to see in person, but the idea here is as I get within a foot, which is what we call the danger threshold, the red lights come up. And if I get within 2 feet, which is right now looking at my laptop in front of it, then the lights go yellow. So we use yellow for warning and red for danger. All of this can be customized, the colors as well as the distances. So the out-of-the-box settings are the 1 feet and 2 feet thresholds, but they can be changed as well. And so we get colors telling us the proximity, the location telling us where the obstacles are, and the blue light that you see in the middle here, I'm just going to cover all the other lights, tells us that we're in short range mode. So the product has come with 2 different modes, one short range and then the second one being long range mode. The short range mode is the distance setups that I told you about, the thresholds. Now, if I press this big red button, we're going to go into long range mode. And now all of the distances are going to be doubled. So instead of a 1 foot danger and 2 feet warning, we're going to get 2 feet for danger and 4 feet for warning. So now you see that all of the lights are lighting up red because it's seeing that my laptop is actually within 2 feet in that danger zone. Now you're also seeing another red light pop up here, and that's actually corresponding to this echo head right here. The reason that those lights are on top is because we typically have the echo heads in the front, in the sides for peripheral vision. And so that way the user can tell that the lights on the top row are for objects in front of them and the lights on the bottom row are for objects behind them. So hopefully that all makes sense. And so that's the visual feedback. Now, if I press this button that you might or might not be able to see, if I push it down, we activate audio. I'm going to go back into short range mode here. And now if I get within 1 foot danger, what you're going to hear, sorry, I just had rebooted the system. So if I get within that 1 foot, you're going to hear that audio feedback. Now, of course, the audio only goes off in the danger zone and doesn't go off in the warning zone, and that's mainly to prevent, excessive beeping so that we're not annoying people. The other thing also is that the beeps will not, the audio will not consistently go off if everything is stationary. So if we have an individual who's, for example, parked in an elevator and they're not moving and the elevator walls aren't really moving either, then you're not going to hear constant beeping unless the person actually gets closer or if somebody else moves closer to the chair. So that's it for the visual and audio feedback. And then we do have the vibration feedback, which Phil mentioned, and Phil actually finds quite useful. In fact, a lot of our clients who have vision issues do find that the vibration module the most useful. And the way that these modules work is they can be placed anywhere on the wheelchair, such as the armrest or the backrest or the seat cushions. We can have up to 3 vibration modules, each corresponding to left, center, and right. And so just as Phil mentioned, something's on the left side, the left vibration module will go off. If something's on the right one will go off. And if something's in the center, then the center vibration will go off. In Phil's case, that's on his backrest, so he can feel it on his back. So that's it for the 3 different types of feedback, the 2 different modes that I said, the short range and the long range is typically used indoors and outdoors, for example. And we can have up to 3 of these echo heads that can be plugged into the main Sentinel unit. Now we do have another configuration as well. So for those who might not need 180 degrees and just need a few sensors with the 45 to 50 degree coverage, they could get the Hydra, which is essentially just a black box where multiple echo heads can be plugged in. But everything else remains the same. They still have the same options for the visual, auditory, and vibration feedback. Now, in terms of how the system is powered, I'm right now powering off a power bank, and we can power it off pretty small power banks, actually. So an example of that would be something like this, which is a 2200 hour milliamp battery. This usually is charged overnight, and can provide up to 10 to 12 hours of charge to the system. Other options are to actually power this right off the chair through the XLR port, for example, or if the individual has a USB hub on the chair, it can stick right into that because it is a USB device. So it's a 5-volt, 1-amp USB device. So that's basically it. The only other kind of smaller detail is that we do have a 3.5mm jack on the bottom here, which can be useful for a buddy button. So if an individual can't toggle this particular button, they can toggle using a buddy button that's attached to the controller. A lot of aspects of the system can be customized. We do have Bluetooth apps that can essentially pair with the device through Bluetooth, and then several aspects of the system, such as the colors, the lights, the brightness of the lights, the intensity of the vibrations, how the feedback is delivered. A lot of that stuff can be customized on the app. And in fact, Phil has the app himself, and he's used it for a bunch of things. So we can hop right back onto the discussion with Phil now, as long as nobody else has any questions. I'm just going to make a quick pause here. Does anyone have any questions? If you want to unmute yourself or provide your questions on chat. I'm just going to put that aside.
Hello, this is Tanya Scott.
Yeah, hi.
You may have said this and I missed it, but how small an object does it sense, and from what distance from the floor? Would it sense something a few inches off the floor versus, a person? Did you speak to that, or?
Yeah, so it does detect different kinds of obstacles. So mainly, these are ultrasonic sensors, and so the main kind of object that they do have difficulty sensing is soft objects, right? So, for example, you could drive right into a sponge with these sensors, and they probably wouldn't sense it. The harder the object is, so the more noise it makes when you hit it, the better the ultrasonic sensors is at detecting it. And so it essentially, the way you can think about it is, more hazardous it is, the more kind of harder it is, the better the sensors do. Now, they do not detect drop-offs, and Phil will actually speak a little bit about that because he uses the brace system in conjunction with the cane in order to detect the to detect drop-off. So what the sensors do detect is objects above the ground. In terms of kind of how low and how high, it actually depends. So these sensors are typically mounted on pretty close to the base of the chair, and that's because that's where we find the customers have most trouble. And so they detect about a 50-degree vertical distance, and then or a vertical a cone, and then 180 degrees of horizontal. And so, depending on where you want to detect the obstacles, we typically suggest that you mount it closer to the base of the chair, and that way it detects things like baseboards and things that come up from the ground, or little kids and pets and that kind of thing. And then use the echo heads, for example, to detect higher level obstacles. So that's what we would recommend, and that's generally, though, you kind of want it lower to the ground because that's where least visibility is for the client. So the closer things are to the base of the chair is really where the visibility is generally tends to be the poorest. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
All right. So
there's another question, I think, but I think your previous.
Yeah. So it says, will it sense a pet or an animal? It does actually. We have seen a lot of customers mention that it's quite useful to detect their cat or their puppy, behind the chair that they wouldn't otherwise be able to see. So it does detect animals and humans as well. I mean, there's a chance sometimes it might not detect someone if you're wearing like really baggy pants and really like kind of a soft material. But in general, once the individual gets closer, because we do have bones and stuff, there's usually something hard there for the sensors to detect. All right, so I'll pop back here on our interview. So let's pick up from where we left off, Phil. So can you talk a little bit about how it was like trialing this new product that you've obviously heard you kind of saw it online, you didn't know too much about how it worked. Can you talk about how it was trialing the system and, you know, setting it up in a way that it would work for you?
Sure. We found the system online and then talked to the PT at Minneapolis VA, and they were willing to try it with me. So we started with I forget what the little cameras are called.
The echo heads?
Echo heads, yeah. We tried the echo heads on my front casters and a full Sentinel on the back, and I just wasn't getting as much feedback as I wanted. So because I don't have any legs, we were able to mount a full sensor on the front and a full sensor on the back. So it really worked out well for me. And then I use vibrators pads on the front, so I don't have to look at any lights or anything. And on the back, because I'm going really slow when I'm backing up, I'm able to use the lights. And because I can't see yellow, we changed the yellow to blue. And Puja has been available immediately at any time that I've needed a question or have had an issue. And she's very helpful. She even came to my house and walked through the house with me to see how it was working and what we could do to improve it. So, yeah, it's really changed my life in that I'm able to function so much better. When I was at the blind school, they taught me to use the white cane. And so with the white cane, I can feel like on a sidewalk, the edge of the sidewalk and the grass, so I know how close I am to the edge of the sidewalk, which the braze does not pick up, and also a curb drop off, which would really be scary. And in fact, I'm still afraid of curb drop offs, but my cane will pick that up. And so I suppose if you have sight, you could see the curb, but I can't, so I use my cane, and it will feel a drop off, and so I can follow along if I'm going on a sidewalk that's next to a curb. I can feel that curb and just follow along on the sidewalk.
Yeah, that's great, Phil. So one other thing that I wanted to ask you about was your experience at Hines. You know, that was a great program in the school there at the Hines VA that you attended. So I wanted to get you to share a little bit about what it was like. I know you mentioned to me that Hines was actually the first time, it was your first time away from home in a completely different environment. So I was hoping you could share with everyone what that experience was like, as well as, you know, how the brace system not only helped you kind of in your familiar environment, but how it could help in an unfamiliar environment like Hines as well.
Yeah, Hines was really a strange place for me, and I often completely got disoriented. And they taught me how to overcome that and to use the cane. And then they housed me in the spinal cord injury unit because of my vent. And then blind school was about a block and a half away. So I had to go either inside or outside about a block and a half. I usually went outside. It was just easier for me. And they taught me to use the cane. But also, it was interesting. One day I was walking with my supervisor over to the SCI unit, and we were walking down the hallway, and he said, there's something, a box in front of you, or a cart or something. And exactly at the same time he said that, my back vibrator, which is my front sensor, um, uh, went off. And so I knew that there was something in front of me the same time that he told me there was something in front of me. So it was kind of a funny experience. But that's how effective the braze system is. I can walk down a hallway, and if my left and right vibrators are not vibrating, then I know I'm in the middle of the hallway. And then same way, if I come into a doorway, then the vibrators will go off and say there's something close here. And then if I'm right in the middle, they're both vibrating the same, then I know, and the blue light is on, then I know that I'm in the warning zone. And it really, really was transforming experience to spend those 2 months at the blind school and learn to use the cane along with the brace system. There were a lot of guys that, I'm not sure if I'm out of line here, but there were a lot of guys that were blind that just let people drive them around, and I'd talk to them and I'd say, you know, you can be independent. Same with my friend Ken. He's afraid to drive because he doesn't know what's around him, but he's getting a brace system and he's learning to use his cane, and I'm trying to teach him to use his cane. And so he's becoming more independent. And I think that's the big thing is I'm independent. I don't need a caretaker to walk me through the house. I can do that myself with the cane and the brace system. And it really works well. I have complete freedom and complete security and no fear that I'm going to run into something.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Phil. We just got a question. Will the system affect the speed or stop the wheelchair if a hazard is very close? So one of the main points of the brace system right now, especially the blind spot sensors, is they do leave the user completely in control. So this is only an alert system. It will give a warning to the person so that they're, you know, then able to respond in time. So this is not a substitute you know, for the driver being vigilant. We still require that the driver is vigilant at all times, but it's giving them that warning. Now, in terms of, you know, affecting the wheelchair speed, we do currently have technology that we are piloting for, especially in training cases where individuals are just learning how to drive and they might not really be competent at controlling the chair. We do have a system right now that is currently being piloted at various clinics. So if that's something that anyone here is interested in, please do reach out. Namith here will provide our contact information on the chat as well. And I'm sure Melissa will probably send out a follow-up. Melissa, I'm not sure if you wanted us to send, we do have a recording of the webinar, so we're happy to send a recording for those who potentially couldn't attend. But we will provide our contact information there as well. And so if you are wanting to, you know, pilot something like that, you know, our main aim here with the system is not to create too much of a dependence on the system. And so we really want to make sure that the person is getting that increased spatial awareness of their surroundings and then are able to take the appropriate action. So Namit just posted our emails, but if you would like to hear about how we can potentially modify the speed, and we do that through, we can do that especially with the alternative access. So for those who are using head arrays and sip and pups, for example, we do have that opportunity. It's not something that is a commercial product, but we do provide it potentially as a training tool in clinic. So happy to chat about that more offline as well. Okay, so we'll keep the questions coming because we are kind of in the Q&A session right now, but I did want to give you guys a sneak peek. And now that you've kind of learned about the system, one of the main questions that came up early on from a lot of therapists was, well, how do I know who can benefit from the system, especially for individuals who might have a cognitive impairment, moderate or even severe cognitive impairments, or perhaps behavioral challenges. How do you identify whether a client will be able to respond if they do receive a prompt? And so in order to kind of answer that question, we came up with an app. And I'm going to do a quick screen share right now. Everyone see that okay?
Yep.
We can see it.
Perfect. So this is an app that is available both for Android and iPhone. You can search on the store. It's called Braze View. So that's Braze, B-R-A-Z-E-V-I-E-W, Braze View. And the idea here is that we wanted to be able to simulate, or some kind of mimic the same sorts of cues that our system is providing in order to be able to see whether an individual can respond to those sorts of cues. And so I'll start off with the basic setup here. And so I'll just do a quick peek because we don't have too much time on this, but again, in the follow-up, we will provide additional education resources, and there are more demos of this online. And of course, feel free to download and play with it. It's fairly self-explanatory. It's got instructions in it as well. So I'll show you what the audio and visual feedback look like here. So here, if I click on audio feedback, what I get is a button here that says press for audio feedback. And if I press that button, what you hear is something very similar to what is provided on our unit. So you can imagine this being used as, let's say you have a client and you want to see if they would be able to respond to an audio cue. You might want to get them to, for example, line up in front of a wall, back up slowly towards the wall, and when they hear that audio cue, the beep, then maybe ask them to do something simple like take their hand off the joystick in order to stop. And that would be a good kind of quick test to see, is the person able to respond to the cue, and also gives you an indication of whether perhaps that is in fact what the challenge is. So if you're finding that they're often backing into things, this would be a good way for you to tell as a therapist if spatial awareness in the rear is perhaps what the problem is, and if having a cue can create the right behavior and that cause effect, then you know that this is potentially the Braze system is potentially valuable. So as I'm showing you this tool, there's two ways to really think about this. One way is, of course, to look at it as sort of a pre-screening tool for the Braze system. So you're using this to identify who might do well with the Braze system. But I'd like you to also think of this as a standalone tool. We hear a lot of therapists who, when they're originally training individuals with power, it's quite a stressful experience for everyone. I mean, the therapists we've heard, they're often chasing after the individuals with like the attendant control or a kill switch to kind of get them to stop if they're not able to stop in time. And so this could potentially create a kind of a less stressful environment for everyone, where a therapist might be able to be a bit more hands-off, take a few steps back, use a tool like this to cue the individual. And then for the individual as well, instead of hearing like stop, you're going too fast, or any sort of frantic yelling, just hearing a beep or that kind of cue might also be a bit more of a pleasant experience for the user as well, and having kind of more of a universal cue to follow. So this has been something that therapists have actually been very excited about, and so we've had therapists download this all across the country right now, and really giving us feedback on how a tool like this might integrate into current training and assessment processes. And so we're very excited to learn about how you might see this tool as being useful. So that's the audio feedback, and then I'll show you what the visual feedback looks like as well. So here we're just trying to identify a couple of things, whether they can see the colors. So for example, this would be a case where Phil, for example, might say, oh, I can't actually see that color yellow, and so we would be able to change to a different color. In his case, I think that was blue. And so this gives us an indication of what colors the client can see, and then we can customize the braze system that way. So once that's done, the next step is to figure out whether the person can figure out what direction the lights are pointing. So here you're trying to get a sense of whether the person understands that that's on the left. And so if they answer it correctly, it moves on to the next question. And so here I'll answer right. And then here, let's say it's supposed to be, the answer is supposed to be straight back, but let's say I get it wrong. It says, doesn't seem right, go back to try again. And so you can have this tool, either you kind of hand it over to the client and get them to do this themselves, or it can be an exercise that you're doing with them as more of a dialogue and a discussion to try and figure out, where the person's cognition is at, so they can understand what's going on. And so if they're able to get through this kind of pre-screening fairly quickly, it gives you a pretty high confidence that they would be able to respond to the system as well. Now, the important point here to make is that this is a good inclusion test, but not a great exclusion test. So what I mean by that is, if someone passes this test, you've got fairly high confidence that they would do well with the system. If they fail this test, though, it doesn't mean that they won't do well with the system, because there are some differences. So for example, visual feedback on a screen of a phone is a lot worse than visibility on our controller, where the lights are really, really intense and bright. In fact, Phil here, even being legally blind, he's still able to see the lights, and he does use the lights, especially when he's backing up. And so it is possible to see those blobs of light, and they are quite bright. And so, I wouldn't dismiss someone as a candidate, but more kind of use this as a tool to say, okay, yeah, you know what, they're doing very well with the tool. Let's move forward with a product eval. So that's just a little bit about the setup. And then I'll show you a quick peek as well at our learning modules. So for those who don't do too well at the initial training, the initial screening, the idea is that this can also act as a learning tool. And so we have various different learning strategies that we can help the person develop the ability and the competence to be able to understand what the visual feedback is saying. So I'll just do an example with only the visual feedback here. We do have 3 different types of tests. The first one is just instructional, where it just explains through visual illustrations what the colors and the directions mean. I'll skip that one for now and go to the knowledge test, which is more scenario-based learning. So let me click on that. And here's an example of what this module looks like. So it shows a picture of a wheelchair, and it says you're trying to back up straight to the wall, and you see the following signal. It shows a yellow light in the center and a red light on the right, and says, please describe how you think your wheelchair is oriented with respect to the wall. This could be something that you as a therapist do, but it could also be something that a parent or a caregiver does at home. And so what we think is the big advantage of this tool is that it provides opportunities outside of the clinic. So for those who maybe are only coming in once in a while and doing a training session, this tool provides an opportunity for them to learn what the visual feedback and the audio feedback means at home in a more consistent way, so that when they come back to clinic for the next session, they actually have increased competence with this. And so we also have a lot of parents right now that are trying this out with their children to help the children understand what the braze system and the feedback means, so that they can do better at driving the chair as well. So here, if I check my answer, I see a visual illustration of what that might look like. And this is just one example of what might be happening, because there's no one right answer to this. But here you see that the wall is very close to the rear right and close to the rear center. And so it gives them a visual picture of what these lights might mean in terms of how their chair is aligned. So that's just one example. And then I'll also just show you a quick example of the the last test here, which is an obstacle simulation, just so you have an idea as to what this might look like. Now, this is really set up to be almost like a game or a quiz that the person can do on their own. And so this is where you can really tell how good the person's getting at this. So an example of this is you've got the wheelchair facing forwards, the danger zone marked in red, and the warning zone marked in yellow. It shows you what the Braze controller is showing and asks you to essentially correlate that with where the obstacle is in the environment. So if I see a yellow light here in the center, I can immediately map that to my warning zone because it's the same color. And the fact that it's lit up in the center means that it's in the center. I just tap that and it says correct, and I can go on to the next question. Now, if I go on to the next level, it grays everything out. So now I no longer have the color cue. And so having a red light on the left means I need to know that it's actually closer to the chair. So it's going to be in this danger zone closer to the chair, and it's going to be on the left. And again, if I get this wrong, it'll just say try again, and I can try it again and keep going here. It's infinite number of questions in random ordering every time. So it's a good tool for somebody to practice on their own at home. And so this has also been a very interesting tool in that it's gotten a lot of therapists rethinking how they currently do training. What we hear from a lot of therapists is right now, kind of the general process seems to be to get the person, figure out their alternative access first, and then figure out all of the seating, get them in the chair, get them driving around a little bit, and then obstacle avoidance, kind of how to respond to walls and obstacles in the environment is almost done, almost kind of at the end of that process. Whereas a lot of therapists who actually saw this tool when we did the demo for them said, this actually gets me thinking about potentially changing the way in which I do training to have them train on this first so that they understand how they're supposed to respond to the cues and what these different signals mean, so that by the time they get in the chair, this is actually second nature to them. And so now when they hear the audio prompt with Braze, they already know what to do. They've already correlated that with taking their hand off the joystick, for example, as the action. And so it kind of helps to break down what is something that's a very complex process, right? So driving a power chair and all of the cognition that is required and all the skills that go into that, this might help break that down into smaller steps and into, figuring out the piece of the cause and effect with how to respond to the prompts so that that's separated even before the person gets into the chair. And that way, once they do get in the chair, we've already built that. So they're not going through the stress of, okay, how do I move the joystick? Oh gosh, now what do I do when I'm in front of the wall, and so on. So it might help, kind of break that a very complex process down into smaller, manageable parts, if that makes sense. So those are our thoughts. This is a very new tool, so it's still out there being used. We'd love for you to try it and give us feedback as well. And if you have other suggestions for things that you'd like to see added or changes you'd like to make, and just how you think you might use this, we'd love to hear more about that. So please do reach out. And as I mentioned in the follow-up, we will give you access to the resources page, and that will give you more information on how you can download this, but you can just get it right off the store, Google Play Store and Apple Store. All right, so I'll stop right there, and I can take any more questions remaining in the, I guess, 7 minutes or so we have left. How about alternative visual displays? Animation, for example. So this is Al. Do you mean in the app, or do you mean in the product itself? Oh, the product. So one of the main reasons that we kept the visual feedback on the controller fairly simple and as light is because we do have a lot of clients with low vision. And so having a screen, for example, where things show the visibility of that would be quite a bit lower than what we have right now. So for example, even if we talked to a lot of clients about we've actually also had discussions around having our visual feedback embedded right into like the RNet display, for example. And one of the feedback we got was the RNet display itself is actually quite difficult to see, especially if you go out in the sun. And so we've for that reason kind of steered clear of having visual feedback in the form of a screen and try to keep it to lights instead that are very bright and that are visible, and actually keeping that away from and steering clear of having it on a screen. Because the other option also that we presented to our customers was having our visual feedback displayed right on their smartphone, since we do have Bluetooth pairing capabilities. And the feedback there as well was saying, hey, we want to be able to use our smartphone as a smartphone for other things, and not have the smartphone batteries, for example, drain with showing visual feedback. So I'd love to hear more about what your ideas are. If you can reach out to me, I'd like to understand more what you mean by animation and what clientele you're thinking about that might benefit from that. We're always open to new ideas, but that's currently the reason why our visual feedback has been fairly simple and just giving color and location information. How does the training setup app interface with the Braze system? So the idea would be that the training setup app is actually fully integrated with our customization app. And so as you're going through training and you're picking these different features, the idea would be that it would actually go right into the customization component. So right now the customization app is a separate app. And so as we're just testing this out with users right now, we do have them as separate apps, but the idea would be that once we do have more feedback from users, that will become a fully customized or a fully integrated single Bluetooth app that would be, sequential. So you would use it for training purposes, and then you would be able to send those settings right to the system. Right now, the customization app is a separate one that you pair with Bluetooth, and you make your customizations, and you also do like real-time updates with the system. So that's the plan for it, is that it becomes fully integrated. Right now, it's just a standalone tool that we're trying to get feedback on what the potential applications might be and how it might be used. Because it doesn't actually necessarily need to be a precursor to the Braze system either, right? You could have it as a completely standalone tool where you're just using it to train somebody, using the beeps to help them understand how close they need to be. And then maybe that's good enough and they go on and they're fine without needing a Braze system. So the plan is to have it all integrated, but we really want to hear more from you as therapists right now of how you would plan on using this tool and what we can do to really integrate that with your current processes. Is there anyone on the call here that has current clients in mind? If you'd like to, either on chat or if you want to just unmute yourself, we're curious to understand what sorts of clients you're thinking about. And of course, you've heard from Phil in terms of how it helps him. We do have clients with various diagnoses, such as we've had, in fact, a lot of users now that have been identified who have stroke and facial neglect. And so that's been another one. Cerebral palsy, having some of the peripheral vision issues there, as well as obviously upper body mobility issues with being able to do a shoulder check, MS, ALS, MD. Those are all been diagnoses that we've seen. So we've seen quite a few diagnoses across the board. John?
Well, I have a veteran that I was working with prior to the COVID-19 precautions. Amongst his diagnoses are diabetes and bilateral above knee amputations, and fully legally blind and pretty much fully blind. He had been using a scooter that he'd self-purchased when he lived independently with his family, and he came in to us requesting a scooter again. He lives in a long-term care facility or independent living facility. The next step I was going to do, I was working with a low vision specialist, and we were going to go visit him at his facility to observe him in his environment to see how he got around. But it seems like he might be a candidate for something like this to help him, because he was largely able to work within his low vision, and he was pretty good, but I just could not sign off on just sending power his way without really taking it a little bit further. So would you guys be able to, I was wondering, would you, down the road be able to, I know it's a long way, but to come have someone help or?
Yeah, absolutely. So Manfred Call is online on this call, and he's our local representative there in Virginia.
Wait, who is it again?
Manfred Call. Namit, if you can provide his...
I'm just kidding. I know him pretty well. Like, so. Manfred! Sorry. Okay, cool. That would be great. I didn't know Manfred does that, so that would actually be super ideal. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Manfred's happy to help, and we do have a process. So if you would like to send in a client intake form, we'll send you all that information in the follow-up as well. It's just brazemobility.com/quote, and that will ask you for the client information, and that way we can quote out a package. Just to give you guys also a range, because we didn't talk about cost. The Sentina here, so the 180-degree system with the visual and audio feedback and all of the mounts, is only $2,000 MSRP, and then we just keep adding to that. So for example, if you had two of the 180-degree sensors, then you're looking at, you know, four grand and up. The vibration modules are only $30 per module, and you'll get at most 3 of those. And then the additional echo head sensors, so these small sensors right here, are $250 each. So you know, we can cost it all out depending on what, and generally we just ask that you fill out the client intake form. That just asks you questions about where the person needs coverage and what some of the visual challenges are. And we will give you guys a quote of the suggested package for that person. So for example, in Phil's case, because he's got a front and a back sensors, Phil seems to always be our first customer for all of our latest upgrades, and so he was actually our first customer when we designed the small Sentina, because our original Sentina was a lot larger, and because of that we couldn't mount it on the front. And so Phil actually came to us at a time where we just developed that, and it wasn't even fully commercially available yet. So he was one of our first users of that, and gave us quite a bit of feedback. And he's now one of the first users that's also going to have a fully integrated system where all of the sensors in the front and the back and the sides are all talking to one another and come out on a single feedback system. And so that's also, right now we haven't launched it widely, but we have already been providing it. And so we can quote that out as well as if necessary. So all we need to know from you is what the client needs are and where their where their visual challenges are, and we'll send you the package that makes the most sense for that client, so that you're not trying to make decisions on what you need to get that client.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we're a little after the top of the hour, but a special thank you to Phil for your time and your experience, and your information has been invaluable to us, and we continue to look forward to working with you all.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks, Phil. We always love when he joins us for these things, and he's got so much insight, and has really become, I think, a resource for other users as well who have vision challenges. I think he's just, been really motivating to a lot of people in terms of becoming more independent. So thank you, Phil. Thank you. Thanks to all of you. This was a fantastic turnout. So thanks so much, Melissa. We didn't know how many people we were going to get on this call. So thanks so much, and we look forward to talking to all of you.
Thank you so much. Send me anything you want, and I'll pass it on.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
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 Thanks, everyone.